This is the Fujifilm X-T5. I've been loaned it for the next few months or so whilst I'm here in Japan. I'm going to run through my first impressions and how it feels to use this as a photography camera, coming from someone who's been an X-T4 user for the last couple of years. Thoughts and feedback, and what I'm liking, what I'm not liking about this camera. So I've been an X-T4 user for the last couple of years or so, but prior to that I was a happy XH1 user for a couple of years, and before that I shot with the X-T2, the X Pro 2. So I've used Fujifilm for photography for the last 6-7 years or so, and I think with the X-T series now it is clearer than ever that this is a camera for photographers. So I've paired it today with the 56mm 1.2. Loving this lens so much. I think this is a strong contender for becoming my favorite Fuji lens. Let's see how it goes over the next few months. So the first thing I want to talk about before I jump into the specs on this is just camera usability. For me, I'm always, first and foremost, how is a camera feeling in your hand? How do you connect with it? Because if you connect with your camera more, you're going to use it more, you're going to take better pictures because you're using it more. And so usability is key for me. And the first thing I noticed when picking up this X-T5 is it's smaller and it's lighter than the X-T4. It's potentially similar, I'd say, to like the X-T2, maybe even the X-T3. Quite literally, first impression, with it being a smaller design, I found that the lever is very close to my nose and my face, which, I don't know what's the problem. Is it this hooter, or is it this? And the second thing that is fundamental to that is we now have a tilt screen again. So it's gone back to the X-T3 design of the tilt screen. I think that's going to make a lot of photographers very happy, because a lot of people, they hate the flippy screen unless you're using it for video. And as I said earlier, I think this is a camera that is very clear as day, designed for photographers. If you want video, XH2S is going to be your best bet. So with this screen design, it's the same as the X-T3 and possibly even the X-T2. I don't think there was any difference between those. But I'm a little bit surprised that they've not designed something very similar to the X100V. So that has a beautiful screen that just sits in flush to the body. Granted, that one isn't a three-way tilt, so it doesn't do the portrait mode. But I kind of feel like maybe there was a design opportunity there, or maybe it's just a case of they got leftover stock of these hinges, and that's how it kind of fits together. The images I'm taking, by the way, today, these are just JPEG straight out camera using my Cozy Chrome recipe, and I'll put the details on the screen, so if you want to copy those over, you are more than welcome. Another thing I've noticed with the body design here is the buttons. They're a different feeling, and I'm not sure if that's just because I've spent a month getting used to the XH2S, which has really nice, soft, sort of squishy buttons. They feel a little bit plasticky, and I don't remember my X-T4 feeling that way, but I might be mistaken on that. I'm not 100% sure. But overall, it does feel like it's a slightly cheaper body design in comparison to the XH2S. And that's because this does come in cheaper as well. And so with the button layout, we've still got the D-pad nice and comfortable on the back there. It's got the same thumb lever as what was on the X-T4, 3 and X-T2, so it doesn't have the updated design that's on the XH2. And we've got the ISO dial, your shutter speed dial, and the exposure comp. The exposure comp is probably my favorite dial, and it's the one thing that I wish was on all other cameras. So we've got 2 SD card slots, the same battery design as the X-T4 and the XH2S. This is a great battery, just so much life in it. Great at parties. USB-C, and then a teeny tiny micro HDMI, which, not the best, but you know, at least you've got something. We have a mic input and a remote, but there is no headphone jack. There's also no battery grip for this camera. So the smaller HDMI and the lack of a headphone jack just further emphasizes that this is a photography-centric camera, not for video. Yes, it does do video, and yes, the cameras do include video, and for those of you who maybe don't care about video and complain about a camera wanting it to be just photography, just remember, all of those advancements in the sensors, in the autofocus, in the exposure changes, all of those improvements that are made for video come across into the photography world as well. The reason that this can shoot 20 frames a second in RAW is because of the advancements in video and other things. So better processors, better R&D in those departments, it does trickle down and it does make your photography cameras better. So a big focus on the X-T lineup of cameras is the dials, and this is staying true to Fujifilm's roots on it. For those of you who don't know, by the way, the T stands for traditional, and so that's where the dials come from. The H in XH is hybrid, and that is great for photo and video, and the X Pro is productive. No, it's not. I'm assuming it's professional. So with the X-T5 as the latest iteration, and the XH2, which only came out about a month or so ago, and the XH2S a few months ago, I think the lineup now is very clearly defined. If you want photo and video, then the XH series is definitely going to be your best bet. Even if you only want video, XH is definitely going to be your best option. If you're wanting photography, you then come down to the XT and the X Pro and the XE series. What I love about Fujifilm is it's the same sensors that are used throughout the cameras. So at the moment we're on the X-Trans 5. That will be coming to the other cameras in good time. And so using the same technology internally, it then comes down to you as an end user. How do you want to shoot? Do you want a rangefinder? Do you want a view with your viewfinder directly with the lens? Do you want a smaller portable camera? And so it really does come down to the ergonomics that you want to choose, rather than necessarily the specs fighting over each other. And that, I think, is one of the smartest ways that you can keep the same technology and just cater to the user. So let's run through the specs on this. So this is using the same 40.2 megapixel sensor that's in the XH2. However, there is one little caveat. So when it comes to video, this can't do 8K. Due to the smaller size, just the heat sink, it's just physically not a good idea, and it would overheat if it did 8K. So this is capped at 6K. But in photography terms, 40.2 megapixels, and it has the pixel shift functionality, which is where it uses the image stabilization to capture a number of images to make a massive 160 megapixel image. The viewfinder, I'm told, is the same as the X-T4, so it's not quite the upgrade that the XH2 has. But what I have noticed is the color correction between the viewfinder and the display is way more accurate than it used to be. I think my X-T4, I had to shift the viewfinder a little bit more red because it didn't quite match to the display. It was pretty inconsistent and quite annoying. I haven't noticed that with this camera. In terms of burst mode for photography, we can shoot 20 frames a second with the electronic shutter, and I believe 15 frames a second with mechanical shutter modes. Realistically, unless you're doing sports and big time events, I never really go above 5 frames a second. I find that that sort of fits my style of shooting, but again, depends on how you are as a photographer. I don't know if I got anything then. I felt like there was a lot to be had.
Yes.
Did I even get it? One thing that is nice to see is the dials are still clicky. So not only are they spinny, but they are clicky as well. They removed that on the XH2. I'm not entirely sure why. I did ask them when I was there in New York, and they didn't really give a solid answer, if I'm honest. So I'm glad to see that we still have the push functionality on these dials at the back. So the benefit of having clicky is that you just have extra function buttons. So on the XH2, by them removing it, I've lost 2 customizable buttons. So it's nice to know that they're still here. So although I'm saying that this is a photography-centric camera, it still can be used as a hybrid camera because the video specs in here are pretty great. So we've got 6K that you can use in either 6K up to 30 frames a second, or you can use a 4K high quality mode, which is going to downsample all of those pixels from 6K to get extra sharpness and just extra detail. You can shoot 4K 50, but in terms of your slow-mos, you're going to be limited to 2K, but you can go up to 240 frames a second. So not quite as good as the XH2S, which is 4K 120. So it's on par with the XH2, which is limited to 2K at 240 frames a second. So in terms of video data rates, the highest you can shoot on here is 360 megabits a second, which is not as high as what you get on the X-H2S, and likewise, there's no ProRes recording on here. So the max you can do is 10-bit in H.265 422 all intra. And with there being no ProRes recording, there's also no proxy recording within here. And for switching between stills and movies, it's exactly the same as the X-T4, where you just have this switch underneath the shutter speed dial just to turn between still and movie, and it will remember your settings based on where you last left them. In terms of film simulation recipes, you've got the same controls that are on the X-T4. So it's got the updated interface of adjusting your highlights and your shadows with a preview. I hope they bring that as a firmware update to things like the X Pro 3 and the X100V. I'm not sure why they've not updated that. I will be asking them when I go and speak with them later this week. Likewise, I'm hoping to have another video out with some interviews that I've done with some of the Fujifilm managers and designers, just going through a lot of the questions and feedback that I have. When I was in New York, I sent them so much feedback and it was pretty well received. I think they were quite tired of all of my thoughts, but as a user of Fujifilm for both photography and now video as well, I think it was welcome. And there is one thing in particular that I fed back to them, and that was the position of the record light when you're recording. It was kind of hard to see, especially if you're shooting from the hip. The viewfinder got in the way, and I was like, do you know what would be great? Is if we just had a giant red box around the screen like you have on Sony and Panasonic cameras. And I've seen on this, you have the option to toggle that, so I'm expecting a firmware update on the X-H2S, if not already. So, Fujifilm, do listen. If you have feedback, they will read these comments, so let them know. So I guess some overall thoughts with the camera. I think it's smart what they've done with making it smaller and tighter. The grip isn't necessarily smaller, it is just tighter, like everything just kind of fits in. And so for those people who maybe complained about the cameras getting bigger and bigger with each iteration and saying, I don't want an XH, so why is my XT getting bigger? Well, this answers your problems. And for those who do want a bigger camera, we have the XH. So there is differentiation in the lineup that helps. One thing that I'm not so keen on though, is they've changed the coating on the top. And you know, I've only had this out for a couple of days or so, and it just feels like it's dusty, and I'm constantly like brushing it off. And then I realized that actually it's the coating. It's like, I don't know if it's attracting the dust or if it's just something about it, but like something is just, I don't know. I believe this will be coming in silver as well. And if I was to be getting one, I probably would get it in silver. Something just feels a bit wrong with it, and I can't quite put my finger on it. I don't know, I don't know enough about metal processing to know what they've done differently to it. It's just not right. Secondly, this MCS switch for your focus, having used the function button that they've done on the X-H2, I've definitely grown to prefer that. What I find with this is so often I find I have to actually spin it around and look at the camera to know whether I'm in continuous single or manual focus. And it is quite a subtle position to just change. You know, you can do it with your hands, but I find that I always have to look to double check, whereas when it's a function button, not only is that customizable for anything, but it shows up on the screen what mode you're in. And that's just a slight tweak. Still happy with the dials, love the dials for photography, but this dial, it's probably the one thing that I'd like as a button. And I wished the focus lever was the updated design with the slightly bigger touchpad and it's just a softer use. This one, over time, and especially in comparison to the newer designs, it just feels a little bit more delicate and not as durable. That's kind of a shame, I think. With all these differences between the camera bodies and slight changes that they've made, I think it now just makes it abundantly clear that the X-H2, the X-H2S, they are the flagships, and then these are the sort of the next level down in terms of other things. And that's reflected in the cost as well. So you're still getting an amazing camera for the cost. It's just if you want the all singing, all dancing, the bells and whistles, Fujifilm now have that option in the more expensive X-H2S. So I think it's super clear what they've done, and it makes it far easier to now recommend cameras when people are asking.